Ivy watched the sun dip low in the sky as she walked towards the playground, her shoes scuffing against the gravel. The air was crisp, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the setting Sunday. As she approached, she spotted Eli, sitting alone on the swing. His prosthetic leg was carefully placed on the ground next to him, the other foot pushing the swing gently back and forth. His dark blonde hair was tousled, and his eyes, normally bright with curiosity, were now dull, lost in thought. Ivy hesitated for a moment, watching him, then stepped closer. "Hey, Eli," she called out softly. His head snapped up, surprised, but a small, uncertain smile tugged at his lips. "Hey, Ivy," he responded, his voice barely above a whisper. The playground was busy, but the children played far from him, as if drawn to the edges of the park, where he couldn't reach. Ivy had noticed it before the way the other kids looked at him, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to help him believe that he could be just like everyone else. As the game continued, Ivy stepped back, watching the scene unfold. She didn't need to be in the center of it. What mattered was that Eli was finally a part of it. What mattered was that for once, he wasn't just the kid in the background, watching everyone else have fun. He was in the game, and as long as Ivy had anything to say about it, he always would be. "They don't want me to play with them," he muttered, kicking a pebble across the gravel. "It's because of my leg." Ivy's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what it felt like to be ignored, to be the one left out. It stung, but she had never let it stop her. She wasn't going to let it stop Eli either. "That's stupid," she said firmly, swinging her legs a little higher, her eyes meeting his. "You're just as good as any of them. Don't let them make you think otherwise." Eli didn't respond at first, his gaze shifting towards the other children, who were now laughing and playing a game of tag. He wanted to be a part of it so badly, but the weight of their judgment kept him rooted to the swing. Ivy didn't like seeing him like this, didn't like how quickly he had accepted the idea that he didn't belong. "You know what?" Ivy said, standing up. "I'm going to get them to play with you. Just wait right here." Without another word, she marched over to the group of kids who were now gathered by the jungle gym. They stopped talking as she approached, a couple of them eyeing her with suspicion. "What's up, Ivy?" one of the girls asked. Ivy crossed her arms, looking directly at the girl who had been the loudest in making fun of Eli. "Eli's gonna join in," she declared. The group exchanged glances, hesitation written on their faces. "Why?" one boy asked, clearly puzzled. "Because he's just like you," Ivy shot back, her voice steady. "And because it's not right to leave him out just because he's different. So either you let him play, or you can find someone else to play with." There was an awkward silence. The group shuffled their feet, unsure of how to respond. Then, after what felt like an eternity, one of the boys finally shrugged. "Fine, whatever, let him join," he muttered. Ivy smiled and turned on her heel, walking back to Eli. "Come on, let's go." "They said you can play," she said with a grin. Eli's face lit up, but there was still a shadow of doubt in his eyes. He stood up slowly, glancing over at the group of kids, who were now watching him. Ivy walked beside him, a steady presence, not letting him falter. As they reached the others, the tension in the air was palpable, but Ivy's unwavering confidence seemed to break it, and slowly, the kids started to include Eli in their game. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a small victory in a world that too often told Eli he didn't belong. And for the first time that day, Eli smiled a real smile, not one forced out of politeness. It was a smile of belonging, a smile that, for now, was enough. Ivy stood beside Eli on the playground, watching as the other children slowly started to go back to their games. The tension in the air was thick, but it was also quieter now. It was as if the weight of her words had settled in, but the silence between Eli and her felt heavier than it should have been. Eli's gaze lingered on the other kids, who were talking amongst themselves, exchanging uncertain glances. "I don't know if I should go back," Eli said softly, his voice cracking slightly. His gaze was fixed on the ground, his prosthetic leg now propped up beside him. He wasn't sure if he really belonged. Ivy could hear the doubt in his voice, and it pulled at her heart. She knew what it felt like to be left out, to feel different, to believe that people's opinions could define who you were. But this time, she wouldn't let it happen. "They might not want me there," Eli continued, his eyes still downcast. Ivy placed a hand on his shoulder, gently turning him to face her. Eli, listen to me. It doesn't matter what they think. It matters what you think. His eyes met hers, searching for something, anything that would give him the courage he lacked. You have every right to be there, just like anyone else. And I'm not going to let them make you feel less than you are. For a moment, Eli was still, as if her words were a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved. Then, as if an invisible wall had cracked, Eli stood up, his posture straighter than it had been all afternoon. He nodded slowly, but the unease in his eyes didn't completely fade. Ivy could see that this was a battle he would have to fight every day, but she wasn't going to let him fight it alone. As they walked back toward the group, Ivy kept pace with him, her presence a steadying force. The other children were still hesitant, eyeing Eli warily as they resumed their game of tag, but Ivy didn't stop. She walked right into the middle of their circle and looked around at them. Eli's playing, she said, her voice firm, her chin held high. The group shifted uncomfortably, the weight of her words hanging in the air. He's not going to stand on the sidelines anymore, Ivy added, meeting their eyes one by one. The children looked at one another, exchanging glances as if they were waiting for permission to speak. Finally, one of the girls, a blonde-haired girl who had been quiet the whole time, stepped forward. Are you sure he can keep up? She asked, her tone a mixture of curiosity and doubt. His eyes met hers, searching for something, anything that would give him the courage he lacked. You have every right to be there, just like anyone else, and I'm not going to let them make you feel less than you are. For a moment, Eli was still, as if her words were a lifeline he wasn't sure he deserved. Then, as if an invisible wall had cracked, Eli stood up, his posture straighter than it had been all afternoon. He nodded slowly, but the unease in his eyes didn't completely fade. Ivy smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory, it was a smile of relief. She turned to Eli, who looked surprised, as if he couldn't believe it. See? I told you they'd be fine with it, Ivy said with a grin. Eli smiled back, but the uncertainty didn't leave his eyes completely. He slowly walked into the circle, and for the first time that day, he didn't feel like an outsider. The other kids didn't move away from him. They didn't make jokes or stare. Instead, they included him, passing the ball to him, letting him run with them. It was small, but it was enough. Ivy watched as Eli started to relax, the tension in his shoulders easing as he ran alongside the other children. His laughter, quiet at first, grew louder as he got more comfortable, and for the first time that day, Ivy felt her heart lift. She knew this was just the beginning. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. Eli wasn't alone anymore. Ivy raised an eyebrow, refusing to back down. Of course he can. Eli is just as good as anyone here. There was a long pause, and Ivy could feel the tension building again. The other children shifted uneasily, unsure of how to respond, but Eli stood quietly beside her, his hands clenched at his sides, his face flushed with the weight of their stares. Finally, one of the boys, a tall kid with messy brown hair, shrugged and said, "Fine, he can join." Ivy watched as the game continued, feeling a quiet sense of victory. She saw Eli's posture straighten with every pass of the ball, his laughter now blending in with the sound of the other children. He was no longer standing on the sidelines, but participating. The smile on his face grew wider with each passing minute, and it made Ivy's heart swell. But in the back of her mind, she knew this moment wasn't enough. There was still more to do. She had seen the way the other kids had hesitated, the way they looked at Eli like he was different. It wasn't over, not yet. As the game slowed, Eli jogged over to Ivy, breathing heavily but with a grin on his face. "Thanks for making me go back," he said, his voice full of a newfound confidence. Ivy smiled at him, but there was something in his eyes that told her the real test had just begun. "You don't need thanks," she said softly. "You did that. I just helped you see that you could." Eli nodded, but his gaze flickered back to the other kids, some of whom were still giving him curious looks, as if waiting for him to mess up, to prove them right. Ivy followed his gaze and sighed. "It's not over yet, is it?" she asked. Eli looked at her, his face darkening a little. "They're still waiting for me to fail," he said. "They don't think I belong here." Ivy could feel the weight of his words. She had been through this before, knowing how it felt to have people expect you to fail, to watch you and wait for the moment when you'd slip up and confirm their worst fears. It was cruel, and it hurt. But she wasn't going to let Eli fall into that trap. "Don't worry about them," Ivy said firmly. "What matters is what you do, not what they think. Just keep playing and show them you're here to stay." Eli hesitated, glancing back at the group of kids. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to fight the weight of their judgment. Ivy could see the uncertainty in his eyes, but she refused to let him back down now. "You're stronger than they think," she said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "You just need to believe it too." After a long pause, Eli straightened his shoulders. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll keep playing." Ivy gave him an encouraging smile, proud of his determination. She watched him walk back to the group, his steps a little firmer this time. As the game picked up again, Ivy stood to the side, her eyes fixed on Eli. She saw him hesitate when the ball was passed to him, the fear creeping back in. But then he took a deep breath, pushed it aside, and kicked the ball forward with confidence. The other kids seemed to notice. At first, they weren't sure what to make of it, but as Eli kept playing, as he ran faster, kicked harder, and laughed louder, the looks of doubt slowly began to fade. The group started to warm to him, passing the ball to him more often, calling him to join in the plays. Ivy could see the change in the air, the subtle shift in their attitudes. They were starting to accept him, not because they had to, but because they saw him for who he truly was. A kid who wanted to play, who was just like them, despite his differences. Eli's confidence grew with each moment. He wasn't just participating now, he was thriving. And Ivy knew that this was the moment that mattered. This wasn't just about winning the game, it was about Eli winning something much more important. His belief in himself. As the game ended, the kids all gathered around Eli, high-fiving him and laughing. It wasn't just a polite gesture anymore. They were genuinely including him, and Eli was soaking it all in. He had proven something to himself today, and that was all that mattered. Ivy stood back, watching the scene unfold. A small smile tugged at her lips. It wasn't just about making the kids accept him. It was about showing Eli that he could stand tall, that he didn't have to wait for anyone's approval to be who he was. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the playground, Ivy felt a quiet sense of pride. Eli had made it. He had found his place. And that was only the beginning. Ivy watched from a distance as Eli continued to play with the other children, his confidence building with each passing minute. She couldn't help but smile. But in the back of her mind, she knew this was far from over. Eli had taken the first step, but there were still hurdles ahead. The game was winding down, and the kids were starting to gather their things, preparing to head home. Eli jogged over to Ivy, his face flushed with excitement, but there was still a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I did it," he said, his voice full of disbelief. "I really did it." Ivy looked at him, proud of the progress he had made. "You did. But it's not just about today. It's about the days ahead. You've got to keep showing them who you are." Eli's smile faltered for a moment. "But what if they start ignoring me again? What if it all goes back to the way it was?" Ivy took a deep breath, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You can't control what they do, Eli, but you can control what you do. Don't let their doubt define you. You've already shown them who you are today. Just keep doing that." Eli nodded slowly, still unsure. "I'll try," he said softly. Ivy could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes. She knew it wasn't enough for him to just believe in himself once. It had to become a habit, a part of who he was. As they walked back to the playground gate, Ivy noticed a familiar face standing near the fence, watching them intently. It was one of the girls from the group earlier, the one who had hesitated the most when Eli joined the game. She stood there with her arms crossed, her eyes locked on Eli. Ivy could feel the tension rise. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice firm but calm. The girl hesitated before speaking, her gaze flickering between Ivy and Eli. "I just wanted to say." "You did good today, Eli," she said, her voice quieter than expected. "You're not like we thought." Ivy raised an eyebrow, surprised by the girl's words. Eli looked at the girl, his face unsure. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl gave a small nod, then turned and walked away, leaving Ivy and Eli standing there in stunned silence. Ivy looked down at Eli, whose face was still a little confused. "See?" she said, her voice soft but encouraging. "You just need to keep being yourself. They'll see it eventually." Eli looked up at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I guess so." As they walked home together, Ivy couldn't shake the feeling that today had marked a turning point. It wasn't just about Eli fitting in or proving his worth to the other kids. It was about him learning to believe in himself. It was about seeing past the judgment of others and realizing that he was more than enough just as he was. When they reached Eli's house, he turned to Ivy, his eyes shining with newfound confidence. "Thanks for everything, Ivy," he said, his voice full of gratitude. Ivy smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to thank me. You did all the hard work. I'm just here to remind you how amazing you are." Eli's smile widened. "I'm starting to believe that," he said, before turning to head inside. Ivy watched him go, feeling a sense of pride that was all her own. She had helped him take that first step, but it was Eli who had found the strength to keep going, and that was something no one could take away from him. As she walked home, Ivy felt a quiet satisfaction. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. But Eli had proven something today, not just to the other kids, but to himself. And that was the most important thing of all. Ivy could feel the weight of the day lifting as she walked back toward the playground. The warm glow of the setting sun painted everything in a golden hue, but inside, she felt the quiet pressure that came with knowing that Eli's journey had only just begun. Today, he had stood up for himself in a way he hadn't before, and for that, Ivy was proud. But she also knew that the real test came tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. She had pushed him to believe in himself, but now it was up to him to keep that belief alive. As they reached the gate of the playground, Ivy glanced back at Eli, who had slowed his pace, a thoughtful look on his face. She could sense the gears turning in his head. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Eli shrugged but didn't say anything. He was thinking. That much was clear. Ivy wasn't surprised. She knew that the social dynamics of the playground would shift once Eli became a permanent part of the group. The other kids were still learning to accept him, and there would be moments where they would push him away again, testing him, waiting to see if he would back down. That's how it always was. Ivy had seen it happen before. "You're not alone, Eli," she said, breaking the silence. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you're not alone." Eli finally looked at her, his brown eyes searching hers. "But they still look at me like I don't belong," he said, his voice barely audible. Ivy felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't easy to be different, to stand out, to fight for your place in the world when everything around you told you to stay in the background. "You don't have to prove anything to them," Ivy replied, her tone firm. "You just need to keep showing up. You belong here, Eli. Don't let them make you think otherwise." Ivy watched as the game continued, feeling a quiet sense of victory. She saw Eli's posture straighten with every pass of the ball, his laughter now blending in with the sound of the other children. He was no longer standing on the sidelines, but participating. The smile on his face grew wider with each passing minute, and it made Ivy's heart swell. But in the back of her mind, she knew this moment wasn't enough. There was still more to do. Eli gave a small nod. But Ivy could tell that the doubt hadn't completely disappeared. It wasn't something that could be fixed in a day or even in a week. Confidence wasn't built in a moment. It was something that had to be nurtured every day. As they walked toward the street, Ivy watched Eli closely, wondering what he was thinking. His shoulders were still slumped, his gait slow and unsure, but there was something different in the way he walked now. "Scared of what?" she asked, her voice gentle. "I'm scared that no matter what I do, they'll never really accept me," Eli replied, his voice cracking slightly. "That I'll always be the kid who doesn't belong." Ivy stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's what they want you to believe, Eli. They want you to think that you're different, that you don't fit in. But the truth is, you're just as good as anyone else here. You don't need their approval. You have everything you need already inside you." Eli looked down at his feet, still uncertain. Ivy could see that he was still fighting with himself, still grappling with the idea that he could be enough. It was a battle that everyone fought, whether they admitted it or not. The world had a way of telling people they weren't enough, that they had to prove themselves over and over again. But Ivy knew that Eli didn't need to prove anything. He just needed to believe in himself. "You're stronger than you think," Ivy said, her voice soft but full of conviction. "You've already shown them that you belong here. And tomorrow, when you wake up, you get to keep showing them that. But more importantly, you'll be showing yourself." Eli's eyes met hers again, and for the first time that evening, Ivy saw something shift in them. It wasn't a huge change, but it was there a flicker of something like belief, something like hope. "I'll try," Eli said, his voice steadier than before. Ivy smiled, feeling the weight of his words. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be days when Eli would doubt himself again. But today, he had taken the first step, and that was all that mattered. "That's all anyone can ask for," Ivy said, giving him a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. "You've got this." They stood there for a moment longer, the quiet hum of the evening surrounding them. Ivy gave him a playful nudge. "You did it, Eli. I just reminded you that you had it in you all along." They stood there for a moment, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the street. The world felt quiet and still, as if everything had fallen into place. Ivy knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more moments when Eli would feel unsure or out of place. But she also knew that he was stronger now. Today was going to be important. She had seen Eli struggle with doubt, seen the way he hesitated when it came to believing in himself. But this was his chance. Today, Ivy would help him take the next step. She had noticed something about Eli the day before. Despite his progress, there was a small part of him that was still holding back, still unsure if he truly belonged. That doubt wasn't gone, not yet. And Ivy knew that if she didn't help him confront it now, it would hold him back again. She grabbed her jacket and headed out to meet Eli at the park. When she arrived, Eli was already there, standing near the swings, his prosthetic leg propped up beside him. His face was serious, focused. He didn't notice Ivy approaching at first, but when he did, he smiled faintly. "Hey, Ivy," he greeted her, his voice a little less uncertain than it had been yesterday. Ivy returned his smile, but she could see the same hesitation in his eyes. "Are you ready for today?" she asked, her voice encouraging. Eli nodded, but the look in his eyes told her that he wasn't entirely sure. "I think so," he said quietly. Ivy stepped closer to him, her voice firm. "You are," she said. "But today, you have to stop waiting for them to accept you. You have to stop waiting for permission to be who you are." Eli blinked, the weight of her words settling in. "What do you mean?" he asked, looking at her with confusion. "I mean," Ivy said, her tone gentle but sure, "you've already proven that you can be here, that you can play, that you can belong. But today, you need to show them that it doesn't matter if they accept you. It doesn't matter if they change their minds. You're here to stay, Eli. And you don't need anyone's approval to keep going." Eli looked at her for a long moment, as if he were processing what she had said. Then, he glanced over at the other children, who were gathering in a circle by the playground. "But what if they still don't want me here?" he asked quietly. "What if they just let me play today, and then ignore me again tomorrow?" Ivy could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of being left out once more. She placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the moment. "Then you keep showing up, Eli. You keep proving to yourself that you don't need their approval. You have your own worth. That's what they need to see." Eli's shoulders slumped slightly, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked like determination. "Okay," he said softly. "I'll try." Ivy smiled. "You don't have to try, Eli. You've already done it." She walked with him toward the group of kids. The others were talking and laughing, but when they saw Eli and Ivy approach, the chatter quieted slightly. There was still hesitation, still that feeling of uncertainty in the air, but Ivy wasn't going to let it stop them. She wasn't going to let Eli shrink back into the shadows. She stood beside him as the kids looked at them, waiting for him to take his place. Eli hesitated, but then he took a deep breath and stepped forward, planting himself firmly in the circle. He wasn't waiting for permission anymore. He wasn't waiting for anyone to tell him it was okay. He was making it okay. The other kids seemed to notice, though they didn't say anything at first. They looked at him, studied him for a moment. But then one of the boys, the one who had been the most skeptical of Eli joining in yesterday, stepped forward. "You're playing with us today, right?" he asked. his voice hesitant but not unkind. Eli nodded, his face serious, his stance more confident than it had been before. "Yeah, I am," he said simply. The boy gave a small smile and passed the ball to Eli. Slowly, the others joined in, and just like the day before, Eli found his place in the game. But this time, it was different. There was no hesitation in their eyes. No one was holding back. They were including him because they wanted to. And Eli was playing like he had always belonged. Ivy stood back, watching the game unfold. She could see how the other kids were treating Eli now, no longer as someone to be tolerated or ignored, but as someone who was part of the group. He had shown them, and more importantly, he had shown himself, that he belonged. The morning passed in a blur of laughter and running, the sounds of children enjoying the game filling the air. Eli was no longer on the outside looking in. He was in the game, in every sense of the word. As the game ended and the children gathered their things to go home, Eli walked up to Ivy, a wide smile on his face. "I did it," he said, his voice full of pride. "I really did it." Ivy smiled back, feeling her heart swell with pride for him. "I knew you would," she said. Eli looked at her, his eyes brighter than they had ever been before. "Thanks for helping me get here," he said. Ivy gave him a reassuring smile. "You did all the work. I just reminded you of what you already knew." Eli grinned, and for the first time, Ivy saw a glimmer of true confidence in him. He was finally starting to believe in himself, and that was all that mattered. Ivy stood beside Eli, watching the other kids from a distance. The moment of victory that he had experienced just yesterday now seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the usual tension that followed. The kids were still warming up to him, but Ivy knew that the real test was about to begin. Eli had proven himself on the playground, but now, outside of the games, the real challenge was how he would be accepted as part of the group. There was always a moment after inclusion when things could go one of two ways. It could either stick, or they would start to push him away again. Ivy had seen it happen so many times before. And it wasn't just with Eli. It was the way things worked. Kids could be quick to change their minds, quick to forget their promises, quick to let the status quo take over. That's what made today so important. Eli had to prove, not to the other kids, but to himself, that he was not going anywhere. He didn't need to wait for anyone's approval anymore. As they walked to the park, Ivy kept her eyes on Eli. He was quiet, his hands shoved in his pockets, his head down. She knew that he was thinking, wondering if yesterday had just been a fluke. Would they really accept him, or was it just one of those fleeting moments where the other kids indulged him before returning to their old ways? Ivy's voice broke the silence. "You're doing great, Eli," she said, her tone warm but firm. He looked up at her, his face uncertain. "Are they still going to want me to play?" he asked. "They want you to play. But more importantly, you've already shown them who you are. You don't need their permission anymore," Ivy replied, her eyes locking with his. Eli hesitated but nodded. He wasn't entirely convinced, but he was trying, and that was the first step. As they reached the playground, Ivy could see the other kids gathered in their usual spots. They were talking in small groups, some laughing, others looking off in different directions. Eli paused at the edge of the playground, not sure if he should approach them. He didn't want to feel like he was interrupting or forcing himself into their space. Ivy gently nudged him forward. "You've got this. Just walk in like you own the place," she said with a grin. Eli took a deep breath and, with a little hesitation, walked over to the group. His presence was enough to catch their attention, and slowly, the conversations quieted. Some of the kids exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Eli stood there, awkwardly at first, but Ivy could see him fighting to stand tall. He wasn't shrinking back anymore. He was standing his ground. Finally, one of the boys, the same one who had been hesitant to let Eli join the game before, spoke up. "You're here to play, right?" he asked, his voice a little unsure. Eli nodded, his hands slightly shaking but his voice steady. "Yeah, I am." For a moment, there was a pause. The group seemed to weigh his words, the atmosphere heavy with uncertainty. But then, something changed. One of the girls stepped forward and tossed the ball to Eli. "Okay then, let's play," she said. Her voice was calm, not mocking, not hesitant. Eli caught the ball, a little surprised by the gesture. For the first time, it wasn't a question or a challenge. It was just playing. The other kids slowly joined in, passing the ball to him, including him in their game without hesitation. It was different this time. There were no looks of doubt, no whispers behind his back. They were playing together. And Eli was a part of it. Ivy watched from the side, her heart swelling with pride. She knew that Eli had earned this moment, but she also knew it was up to him to keep showing up. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments when the doubt would creep back in. Moments when the other kids might fall back into their old ways. But Eli had already shown them what he was capable of. He had proven that he could be part of the group, that he could play just like everyone else. And today, he wasn't waiting for their approval. He was taking his place. As the game continued, Ivy saw Eli's confidence grow with each pass of the ball, each successful play. He wasn't just playing for the other kids anymore. He was playing for himself. And that was the real victory. As the game ended and the kids started to gather their things, Eli walked up to Ivy with a smile on his face. "I did it," he said, his voice full of pride. Ivy smiled back, proud of how far he had come. "You did, and you'll keep doing it," she said, her voice soft but full of certainty. Eli nodded, his eyes shining with the confidence he had fought so hard to find. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I will." Ivy watched him walk home, his steps a little lighter than before. She knew this was just one step on a much longer journey. But today, Eli had made the choice to stop waiting for approval. He had chosen to believe in himself, and that was the hardest, yet most important step of all. Ivy could feel the weight of the day pressing on her as she walked to the park. The warmth of the afternoon sun was now turning into the coolness of evening, and the tension that had been building between her and the other kids was starting to take shape. Eli had made so much progress, but she knew that was only part of the journey. Today was going to be different. Ivy was determined to see him through this next step, to make sure he didn't let the doubt creep in again. As she arrived at the park, she saw Eli already there, sitting by the swings, watching the other kids from a distance. He wasn't playing today. His eyes were distant, as if he was waiting for the other kids to come to him, to prove that he really belonged. Ivy walked over to him, and as she reached his side, he looked up at her with a hesitant smile. "Hey, Ivy," he greeted her quietly. "How's it going?" Ivy sat down next to him, her eyes scanning the scene in front of them. The other kids were running around, laughing, and playing games. But Eli wasn't a part of it today. She could tell he was starting to feel the isolation creeping back in. "It's going," Ivy said, her voice calm but purposeful. "But I can see what's going on in your head, Eli. You're waiting for something. Waiting for someone to invite you to play again." Eli shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering away. "I don't know, Ivy," he said, his voice quiet. "It's like they're waiting for me to mess up again, to prove that I don't really belong. What if it doesn't last? What if it all falls apart again?" Ivy felt the familiar pang of frustration, but she pushed it down. She understood what he was feeling. The doubt, the uncertainty, it was all too familiar. She had faced it herself, many times. "Eli, listen to me," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "You've already proven yourself. You've shown them that you belong, that you're just as good as anyone else here. What matters now is not what they think. It's what you think. And you have to stop letting their opinions control how you feel about yourself." Eli looked at her, his brow furrowed. "But what if I mess up?" he asked. "What if they see that I'm not perfect, and they just go back to treating me like I don't matter?" Ivy took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. She knew that fear. The other kids were running around, laughing, and playing games. But Eli wasn't a part of it today. She could tell he was starting to feel the isolation creeping back in. "It's going," Ivy said, her voice calm but purposeful. "But I can see what's going on in your head, Eli. You're waiting for something. Waiting for someone to invite you to play again." Eli shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering away. "I don't know, Ivy," he said, his voice quiet. The fear of being exposed as not good enough, of being judged and rejected. But she also knew that it wasn't about perfection. "Nobody's perfect, Eli," she said softly. "Not you, not me, not anyone. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve to be here, to be a part of this group. The moment you stop waiting for their approval and start believing in your own worth, that's when everything changes. Eli looked down at his hands, his fingers twisting nervously, but it was still buried beneath layers of fear and uncertainty. He had made progress, but there was still work to be done. "So what now?" he asked, his voice still unsure. "What do I do if they start ignoring me again?" Ivy smiled at him, her eyes soft with understanding. "You keep showing up. You keep proving to yourself that you don't need anyone's approval, and you keep pushing forward, no matter what." She stood up and extended her hand to him. "Come on, let's go join them. Don't wait for an invitation, just go." Eli hesitated for a moment, looking from Ivy's outstretched hand to the group of kids. He was scared. She could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes darted nervously to the side. But then, slowly, he took her hand, and together, they walked toward the group. The other kids noticed them approaching, and for a moment, there was that familiar hesitation in the air. But this time, Eli didn't wait for their approval. He walked right up to them and threw himself into the game, and as the ball passed to him, he caught it with ease, as if he belonged. No hesitation, no waiting for someone to tell him it was okay. He just played. The other kids were quiet for a moment, surprised, unsure of what to do. But then, one by one, they started to include him. They passed the ball to him, called out his name, and for the first time, Eli felt like he was a part of the group not because they had to include him, but because they wanted to. As the game continued, Eli's confidence grew with every pass, every shot, every moment where he proved to himself that he could do this. He wasn't the outsider anymore. He was just a kid playing with his friends. And as Ivy watched from the sidelines, a smile tugged at her lips. She knew that today was a turning point. Eli had stopped waiting for permission to belong. He had made his own place in the world. And no one could take that away from him. Ivy watched as the game unfolded before her, a quiet satisfaction building in her chest. Eli was no longer the outsider. He wasn't the kid who stood alone, waiting for someone to throw him a ball or offer a place in the game. He was in it, fully involved, laughing with the other kids, and more importantly, he was starting to enjoy it. She could see the shift in him, the change from someone who doubted himself to someone who was finally realizing his own worth. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the playground, Ivy could feel the weight of the moment. It wasn't just about the game or the kids accepting him. It was about Eli learning to accept himself. He had fought so hard to get here, to make it this far, and today, he had taken another step forward. He had stopped waiting for permission. He had stopped waiting for the approval of others. Ivy could see the confidence in Eli's face, the way he stood a little taller, the way he smiled a little brighter. He wasn't looking over his shoulder anymore, waiting for someone to judge him or criticize him. He was just there, enjoying the moment, just like everyone else. As the game ended, Eli jogged over to Ivy, his face flushed with excitement. He wasn't the nervous, unsure kid who had walked into the park just a few days ago. He was different now. "I did it," he said, his voice full of pride. "I really did it." Ivy smiled, her heart swelling with pride for him. "You did, and you're going to keep doing it," she said, her voice steady and filled with certainty. Eli nodded, but there was a new light in his eyes, a light that hadn't been there before. He looked at Ivy, his expression softening. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said quietly. Ivy shook her head, her smile never fading. "You did all the hard work, Eli. I just reminded you of what you were already capable of." Eli looked down at his feet for a moment, as if processing her words. Then, he looked up at her again, his gaze steady. "I'm starting to believe it," he said, his voice stronger, more sure of himself than it had been before. Ivy placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it gently. "That's all that matters," she said. "You believe in yourself now, and that's something no one can take away from you." They stood together in the fading light, watching the other kids gather their things and head home. The playground, once a place of isolation and doubt for Eli, now felt different. It was a place where he belonged, where he had earned his spot not because anyone had given it to him, but because he had shown up and proven himself. He had made it his own. Ivy could see it now. The journey was far from over. There would be challenges, moments when doubt would try to creep back in. But for the first time, she felt confident that Eli could handle whatever came his way. He had taken the first step, and he was ready for whatever came next. As they walked toward the exit, Eli turned to Ivy, his face thoughtful. "Do you think they'll ever forget what happened?" he asked, his voice uncertain once more. Ivy glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "Maybe some of them will forget. Maybe some won't," she said. "But what matters is that you don't forget. You don't forget what you've learned, what you've achieved. You don't forget that you're enough, just as you are." Eli thought about this for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I won't forget." And for the first time, Ivy truly believed him. As they left the park behind and walked into the quiet evening, Ivy felt a deep sense of peace. Eli had made it through one of the hardest challenges he had ever faced, and he had done it on his own terms. The road ahead would still be full of challenges, but Ivy knew that Eli was stronger now. He had learned that the only approval he needed was his own. And that, she realized, was the most important lesson of all. Ivy watched as Eli walked beside her, his steps light, his shoulders no longer carrying the weight of doubt that had once held him back. The day had been filled with small victories, and now, as they walked toward the park exit, she couldn't help but feel proud of how far he had come. The challenges that had once seemed insurmountable were now behind him, replaced by a new kind of confidence. They had made it through the hardest part, but Ivy knew that the real work was still ahead. Eli had proven that he could face the world, that he had the strength to stand tall, even when others doubted him. But today had only been one step in a much longer journey. It wasn't just about fitting in or winning the approval of the other kids, it was about Eli learning to believe in himself, to see his own worth, and to never let anyone, including himself, take that away. As they reached the street corner, Eli stopped walking and turned to Ivy, a serious expression on his face. "Do you think they'll really accept me now?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Ivy stopped and looked at him, her eyes soft. She could see that the old fear, the fear of rejection, was still there. But she also saw the strength in him, the determination that had started to grow over the past few days. "It doesn't matter if they accept you or not, Eli," Ivy said, her voice steady. "What matters is that you accept yourself. You've already shown them who you are. You've already proven that you belong here." Eli looked down for a moment, taking in her words. He had come so far, and Ivy could see that he was finally starting to believe it. Slowly, he nodded. "I think I'm starting to get it," he said quietly. "I don't need to keep proving myself to them." Ivy smiled, proud of how far Eli had come. "Exactly. You've done the hard part. Now it's just about showing up, day after day, and never letting anyone make you feel small again." Eli's smile grew, and Ivy could see the spark of something new in his eyes. It wasn't just the confidence that came from fitting in with others, it was the quiet strength that came from within, the kind of confidence that no one could take away. "Thanks, Ivy," Eli said, his voice full of gratitude. "I don't know if I could have done it without you." As they walked toward the exit, Eli turned to Ivy, his face thoughtful. "Do you think they'll ever forget what happened?" he asked, his voice uncertain once more. Ivy glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "Maybe some of them will forget. Maybe some won't," she said. "But what matters is that you don't forget. You don't forget what you've learned, what you've achieved. You don't forget that you're enough, just as you are." Eli thought about this for a moment, then nodded. He had faced his fears, overcome his doubts, and found the courage to believe in himself. And that was something no one could take away from him. As they continued walking, side by side, Ivy felt a sense of peace wash over her. Eli had found his place, not because anyone had given it to him, but because he had claimed it for himself. He had shown the world, and more importantly, himself, that he belonged. And no matter what came next, Ivy knew that Eli would be ready. He was no longer the kid who needed to be validated by others. He had already validated himself, and that was all that mattered. Ivy watched as the days passed, each one bringing new challenges and new opportunities for Eli to show just how much he had grown. The playground, which had once felt like a place of isolation and doubt for him, had become a symbol of his strength. The other kids had accepted him, yes, but more importantly, Eli had learned to accept himself. Ivy knew that there would be times when the doubt would come back, when the pressure of trying to fit in would weigh on him. But now, she could see the difference. Now, When Eli faced those moments, he would have the tools to push through them. She had given him the confidence to stand tall, to believe in himself, and that was something no one could take away. But today was different. Ivy had noticed a change in Eli. A quiet confidence had settled into him, but there was something else, something deeper. It was as if he was beginning to see the world not just as a place to fit into, but as a place where he could make an impact. She had seen it in the way he carried himself, in the way he interacted with the other kids. He was no longer waiting for permission. He was taking charge of his own story. As Ivy approached the park, she saw Eli sitting on the swings, looking out at the group of kids who were gathered on the other side of the playground. For a moment, he didn't see her. He was lost in his thoughts. And Ivy could tell that he was working through something. She walked up quietly, not wanting to interrupt his moment, but she couldn't stay away for long. "Hey, Eli," she called out, her voice soft but full of warmth. He turned to her, a faint smile on his face. "Hey, Ivy," he said, his voice still carrying that quiet confidence, but something in his eyes told her that he was struggling with something. "What's going on?" Ivy asked, taking a seat beside him on the swing. Eli looked at her for a moment, his gaze distant, before he spoke. "I'm just thinking," he said slowly. "I've been a part of the group for a while now, but I don't know. I feel like there's something more I should be doing. Something more I could be." Ivy listened carefully, sensing that Eli was ready for a bigger challenge. This was no longer about fitting in or proving his worth to others. This was about him finding his own path, his own purpose. "You've already done something big, Eli," Ivy said, her voice steady. "You've shown everyone who you are. But now, maybe it's time for you to show yourself what you're capable of." Eli turned to her, his eyes searching hers for understanding. "What do you mean?" he asked. Ivy smiled gently, her eyes soft with affection for him. "I mean, you've learned that you don't need anyone's approval. You've learned to stand on your own. But now, it's time to take that confidence and use it to make a difference, not just for yourself, but for others. You've got so much to offer, Eli, and I know you'll find a way to share that with the world." Eli sat quietly for a moment, taking in her words. It was as if a new realization was settling into him, one that he hadn't quite put into words before. "You really think I can make a difference?" he asked, his voice full of doubt but also a hint of hope. Ivy nodded, her smile widening. "I know you can," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "You've already proven how strong you are. Now it's time for you to show the world what you're capable of. Don't wait for someone to tell you it's your time. You're the one who gets to decide that." Eli looked down at his feet, thinking for a moment. Then, slowly, he looked back up at Ivy, a new determination in his eyes. "I'm going to try," he said quietly, but there was a fire in his voice that Ivy hadn't heard before. It was the sound of someone who had made up their mind. "I'm going to start showing up, not just for myself, but for the people who need to see what I can do." Ivy felt a surge of pride swell inside her. She knew this was a turning point for Eli. This wasn't just about him finding his place anymore. This was about him stepping into his power, his purpose. She could see it now, the same quiet confidence, the same strength that had carried him through the toughest moments. But now it was backed by a deeper understanding of who he was and what he could offer. "I'm proud of you, Eli," Ivy said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Eli smiled, his face lighting up with the confidence she had known was always inside him. "Thanks, Ivy," he said, his voice steady and strong. "I'm ready." Ivy watched him walk toward the group of kids, his steps purposeful, his head held high. This was it. This was the moment when Eli stopped waiting for the world to give him permission to be great. He was stepping into his greatness on his own terms. And Ivy knew that, from now on, nothing would hold him back. Ivy stood back, watching as Eli took his first steps into the group with a new sense of purpose. He had changed in ways that were both visible and invisible, and now it was clear to her that he had learned something profound, something that would stay with him forever. She could see the change in the way he carried himself, in the way he approached the other kids, in the way he didn't wait for anyone's permission to take part in their games or their conversations. Eli wasn't just following along anymore. He was taking ownership of his place in the world. He was showing up for himself. It wasn't easy, and Ivy knew it never would be. There would always be moments when doubt would sneak back in, when the world would try to tell him that he didn't belong, that he wasn't enough. But now, Ivy was sure that Eli had the strength to stand tall and face it. As the days went on, Ivy could see that Eli wasn't just playing with the other kids. He was becoming their leader, without even trying. When the other children hesitated, unsure of how to navigate a new game or challenge, Eli stepped in, offering his ideas and suggestions, making everyone feel included. He was no longer just one of the kids. He was the one who made everyone feel like they mattered. Ivy watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. She had known from the start that Eli had potential, but now she was seeing it with her own eyes. He was the kind of person who could inspire change in others, not because he was perfect, but because he had learned to be true to himself. He had found his voice, and he was using it to create something better, something more inclusive. As they sat together on the swings one afternoon, Ivy could see the difference in Eli. He wasn't looking for validation anymore. He wasn't trying to fit into someone else's mold. He was simply being himself. It was the most freeing thing she had ever witnessed. Eli looked over at her, his face soft with a contented smile. "I feel different now," he said quietly, almost as if he were surprised by his own words. "I feel like I can do anything, like I can be anyone I want to be." Ivy smiled back, the pride she felt for him overflowing. "You can, Eli. You already are." Eli's smile widened, but there was something deeper in his eyes now, a calm confidence, a self-assurance that hadn't been there before. "You were right," he said softly. "I've been waiting for someone else to tell me that I could be great. But now I see that I was the one holding myself back." Ivy nodded, her heart swelling with pride. The world is full of people waiting for someone else to tell them they matter. But you already know that you do. You've known it all along, Eli. You just had to believe it for yourself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the playground, Eli stood up, his posture more confident than it had ever been. He wasn't just one of the kids anymore. He was someone who knew his worth, who understood the power of showing up for himself. "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next," Eli said, his voice steady. "I've got this now. I'm going to keep pushing forward." Ivy stood beside him, her heart full. She had watched him grow from someone who doubted himself, someone who was afraid to take risks, into someone who was willing to face the world head-on. "I'm proud of you, Eli," Ivy said softly. "You've come so far, and this is just the beginning." Eli nodded, his eyes focused on the horizon. He wasn't looking back anymore, and he wasn't waiting for anyone to give him permission to be who he was. He had already claimed his place in the world, and as he walked away from the swings, Ivy knew that whatever came next, Eli would be ready. He had learned that the most important thing in life was to believe in yourself, to know that you are worthy, and to show up every day with the confidence to take on whatever challenges the world had to offer. She watched him walk into the future, and for the first time in a long while, she knew that Eli's journey wasn't about fitting in or proving his worth to others. It was about him finding his own path and walking it with pride, confidence, and the unshakable belief that he had everything he needed to succeed. Ivy stood at the edge of the playground, watching Eli as he ran with the other kids. His laughter rang out across the field, a sound of pure joy and freedom. It was a sound that had been a long time coming, but now it was here, and it was hers to hear. She had seen him struggle, had witnessed every moment of doubt, every moment of hesitation. She had seen the weight he carried, the weight of not feeling good enough, not feeling like he belonged. But now, as she watched him, she knew that weight had been lifted. Eli wasn't the same kid who had walked into the park months ago. He wasn't the kid who needed permission to play, to speak, to exist. He had found his voice, his place, and his confidence. He had learned to stand tall, not because the world told him he could, but because he believed it himself. Ivy smiled to herself, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had been part of Eli's journey. She had helped him see his potential, but it was Eli who had done the hard work. It was Eli who had fought through the doubt, who had learned to accept himself, who had pushed past the obstacles and shown the world who he truly was. She watched as Eli stopped in the middle of the field, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over the park. For a moment, Eli just stood there, taking it all in. The other kids were still playing, but Eli seemed to be lost in his thoughts. Ivy walked over to him, her footsteps light on the grass. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Eli turned to her, his face breaking into a smile. "Yeah," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm just thinking, I've come a long way, huh?" Ivy nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "You sure have." Eli looked out at the group of kids, his eyes thoughtful. "I've learned a lot. I've learned that I don't need to wait for anyone's approval. I don't need anyone to tell me I belong. I already know I do." Ivy's smile grew wider, her heart full. "That's the most important lesson of all." Eli turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. "Thanks, Ivy. I couldn't have done it without you." Ivy shook her head, her smile soft. "You did all the work, Eli. I just reminded you of what was already inside you." Eli looked down at his feet for a moment, a quiet thought passing through his mind. Then, with a deep breath, he looked back up at Ivy. "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. Ivy nodded. "I know you are." For a moment, they just stood there together, watching the other kids play. The world seemed to slow down around them, as if giving them both time to reflect on how far Eli had come. He had found his place in the world, and Ivy knew that no matter what came next, he would face it with the same strength and determination that had gotten him this far. Eli had learned to believe in himself, to stop waiting for permission to be great. He had claimed his place in the world, and no one could take that away from him. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Ivy took one last look at the park. She knew that this chapter of Eli's journey was coming to an end, but it was only the beginning of the next one. Eli was ready to step into the world on his own terms, and Ivy would be there, cheering him on every step of the way. She watched as Eli ran toward the other kids, joining in their game, his laughter echoing across the field. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of pride and peace. Eli had made it, and no matter where life took him, he would always know that he was enough. That was the greatest gift she could have given him. And as the day came to a close, Ivy turned and walked away, knowing that the future was bright for Eli. He had learned everything he needed to know, and now, the world was his for the taking. In this moving and inspiring Black story, a young boy named Eli learns to overcome doubt and insecurity with the help of a supportive friend. Through his journey, Eli discovers his worth and the power of self-belief, showing the world, and more importantly, himself, that he belongs. This Black story is about growth, confidence, and finding one's place in a world that often makes it hard to do so. Eli's transformation from a shy, uncertain child to someone who embraces his strengths and takes charge of his own narrative is truly powerful. As Eli grows, he learns that approval from others is not as important as believing in himself. In this Black story, Eli's journey proves that no matter what others think, when you believe in your own worth, you can accomplish anything. With the unwavering support of his friend, Eli conquers the challenges of fitting in and steps confidently into a future where he knows he can make a difference. This Black story highlights the importance of resilience, self-empowerment, and taking control of your own destiny. It's a reminder to never wait for someone else to tell you that you matter. You have to believe it for yourself. This journey of self-discovery and the acceptance of one's true value is a perfect example of the strength and beauty found in Black stories. These powerful tales not only inspire us to be our best selves but also teach us to never let doubt hold us back. Eli's story is one of strength, courage, and the realization that we all have the potential to make a positive impact on the world.